Welcome to today's webinar, Think Like Your Visitors to Increase Website Conversions. I will be your host, Shannon Madlin, Senior Marketing Manager at AddThis. But before we start, just a couple housekeeping notes. We are recording this and we'll be sending out links to the webinar and the slides from this presentation. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them in the Zoom Q&A console at the top right of your screen. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can towards the end. For those of you not familiar with AddThis, we help companies around the world optimize their marketing effectiveness and grow their audiences with tools that are powered by interest-based behavioral data. You've likely seen our share buttons, which are on over 15 million websites worldwide. Over the last year, we've expanded our offerings to help marketers better engage and convert their customers. Specifically, we do this through website marketing tools like welcome bars, overlays, and sliders that help you promote personalized messages and calls to action for each different visitor type that comes to your site. For example, you might have seen one when you registered for this webinar. We showed a mobile-friendly overlay to many of you when you exited the landing page for this webinar. We featured a relevant conversion rate optimization article we thought that you might enjoy. And ta-da, we saw a 12% click-through rate. So it did work for us. Many of our tools are free, and we'd love for you to give them a try. If you're not already using AddThis, go ahead and go to addthis.com and register. If you are already using AddThis, just activate these targeting tools in your dashboard. But enough about us. On to today's talk. Today, we're going to speak with Eric Johnson, the Marketing Optimization Manager at Morningstar, a leading provider of independent investment research. At Morningstar, Eric works on the Behavioral Insights team, where he works to better understand and help investors overcome behavioral biases. For today's talk, Eric will cover how marketers and website owners can harness some basic theories of behavioral psychology to better understand their visitors and increase website conversions. So with that, Eric, take it away.
Well, yeah, thank you so much to AddThis for having me. I'm really excited to speak with everybody here and talk about some psychology about your websites. So to jump into what this is all about, so I think it's pretty safe to assume that pretty much everyone attending today most likely has some kind of website that they're managing or owning or running, and I would imagine that on that website you have some sort of actions you want people to take. It's probably not just sitting there to look pretty and have a great design. You probably want people to take some kind of action. But if you're like most people with websites, you probably don't see that happen as often as you'd like, and maybe you're not getting quite the results that you would hope to get from your website. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we can increase more results on your website by thinking about how your visitors think, to know how to engage with people that are coming to your website and get them to take action, whether it's signing up for an email list or buying a product or downloading an application. You have to understand their psychology and the way they think and how people get engaged in that area. So to do that, I'm going to run through about 4 key areas here. But before I get started, I'll do a very short introduction to myself. As I said, my name is Eric. I'm the Marketing Optimization Manager at Morningstar, which is a leading provider of investment research and data analysis. And basically, we provide products and research to help investors reach their goals. And I'm a member of what we call our Behavioral Insights team. So what we do is we take what we know from behavioral economics and social science, and we apply that to the business and to how we operate and how we communicate with our customers and how we design our products using psychology. So with that, I'll dive into it here. So the first thing I want to talk about is speaking to the right system of your visitors. So what does this mean? But let's take a look at an example list to start with. So take a look at the 2 images on the left and right here. So these are both a stovetop, and the burners, as you can see, are laid out the exact same way, but you can see that the knobs on the bottom are a little bit different. So which one do you think when you look at that is just more intuitive to know how to use? Now, it's obviously the right one, isn't it? Because the knobs are mapped very naturally to the way that we would actually use it. We know the back there are in the same exact shape as the actual burners. Whereas the one on the left, it isn't overly complicated, but we've kind of got to pause for a second and just make sure the back left means the right one, because they're not mapped in the same physical design. And this kind of shows how the different ways that our mind thinks. When we have to kind of do that pause and think, we get out of what we call our system 1, which is an automatic system, and into system 2, which is more reflective and deliberative. And this is kind of the core tenet of behavioral economics. So to dive into this a little more, System one is what we would call our brain's fast, automatic, and intuitive approach. It's what's kicking in when we rely on our intuitions, our emotions, and our kind of vague natural feelings kind of like Homer Simpson. Homer tends to make a lot of snap decisions without thinking too much. And most of the day, we're kind of like Homer. We think pretty quickly and act out of habit. Now, this works really well in familiar situations like brushing our teeth or commuting to the same route that we use in the office, because we don't really have to think about how to do those. They just happen out of habit. If I throw a baseball at you unexpectedly, System 1 is going to kick in and put your hands up so you avoid getting hit in the face. And if I ask you what 2 plus 2 is, System 1 kicks in and just has you answer 4 right away. You don't have to actually calculate that. Whereas System 2, which we call our reflective system, is a little more deliberative. 2 plus 2 is easy, but if I ask you what 234 times 12 is, unless you're a real math whiz, you probably have to kind of sit and calculate that out and use System 2 to process the answer. Whenever a decision requires more analysis and deeper thought, this is when we're in System 2. It's our mind's slower and more analytical mode, where reason dominates more than kind of habit and emotion and intuition. Now, this is more like Spock from Star Trek. He's a very careful thinker and makes decisions more like a robot than a human. So he's almost always relying on System 2 to make decisions. Now, our conscious use of System 2 is what most of us would think about when we think of thinking is. It's where we're carefully analyzing and analyzing our choices. So how does this apply to your website? Well, if you think we're always in one of these systems, people are probably using one system or the other when they're navigating your site and looking to take action. So we want to be intentional about that. We want to be intentional about that, especially because thinking generally prevents action. Whenever we get into System 2, it's a little harder and a little more deliberate. We tend to kind of avoid that as much as possible, conserve our brain's energy. So to use an example of this in the real world, take a look at 401k programs that most employers offer. Traditionally, employees have had to opt into their employer's program by filling out some forms and linking in their bank information and choosing the contribution amount and all these different steps. And when that's the case, only about 55% of employees participate in those programs. But what many companies have begun to do is automatically enroll employees into a 401k, where they skip all those steps and allow them to just opt out as they choose rather than have to opt in. And we see participation rates grow by about 30% when that happens. They're automatically enrolled. And this is because we skipped all the steps and eliminate the complex actions towards what people want to do, but never get around to actually doing. When you poll employees about whether they want to enroll in a program, almost 95% of them say they want to participate. But see, there's a big gap between what people want to do and what they actually end up doing. Just that simple act of having to complete paperwork and the extra effort and thinking is enough to keep people from enrolling, even though they're probably losing tons of money in their retirement accounts. So, and think about that. What we want to do on our website is we want to apply to System 1 first. We want to use that easy mode of thinking to get people to take action on our website. So the first way we want to do that is we want to communicate very clearly. We want to clearly state what our value proposition is, the who, what, and the why, who it's for, what the benefits are, and why it's relevant to the visitor. And you also want to speak in the language that your visitors actually use as opposed to more technical, detailed jargon. So let's look at a couple examples of this. So when you take a look at this example from Stripe, now if you don't know what Stripe is, within a few seconds here, you have a pretty good idea of what it does. It's payments for developers. It makes it easy to start accepting credit cards on the web today. Now, I know right away that this is a payment processing system online for web developers. Now, I myself am not a web developer looking to use payments, so I know this isn't for me. But if this was the type of solution I was looking for, within 2 to 3 seconds, I know exactly that it's relevant to me. And think about how to speak in the language your visitors use. When you're looking at phone plans, for example, and a lot of times they use just the red line here, the red text of 1 gigabyte, 3 gigabytes, or 6 gigabytes for your data plan. Now, I have no real idea what 3 gigabytes of data means for my monthly phone plan. But when they explain it in the bottom here, that's for one user who's streaming music and is online all the time, that puts it in terms that I understand and that I can relate to. And I can tell that that's about what the type of usage that I have. So you want to avoid being overly technical and using terms that people aren't using in their day-to-day lives. The next thing you want to do is make whatever action it is you want to take on your website very easy to find. So in marketing, we try to call it a call to action. And we want that call to action to be really clear and easy and understand within a couple seconds that that's what we're supposed to do. So you look at this example of Crazy Egg. It's this big yellow button here, and there's an arrow pointing right to it. It's very clear to me right away that that's what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's the action I should take, at least that I know the website wants me to take. And outside of making it easy to find, we also want to make it really clear. So this is an example of a test we did at Morningstar where we had a button here to download a white paper on retirement solutions. And we traditionally had this one on the left, which just said kind of a vague call to action of learn more. So we changed that to simply say download paper. We saw a 200% increase in the amount of people that actually clicked on that and downloaded this white paper. That's because it's just that little bit of clarity that makes it the outcome more tangible and tells us exactly what's happening when we take that action. Makes it a lot easier for us to do that. Now, the other thing we want to do when we get people to take action, utilize our system one, is we want to make action really easy. So one way we want to do this is use effective defaults. So as a simple example, think about whenever you set up a new piece of software or a new app, and you'll usually get a prompt like this one to use the standard settings or the default. And alternatively, you can enter in some sort of custom setup, but unless you're a real computer geek, you're likely always going to go with the defaults without much attention to what's in there and just trust the software developer that those standard options are the best ones. Think about how much time and mental energy it would take to complete custom setups for every piece of software you download, and how often you would probably just skip that process altogether if you had to do that. Now, outside of defaults, you also just want to make the steps really simple. So look at this example from Slack's onboarding. And there's just 2 forms to fill out. Like, you don't even have to pick a password to sign up. You just need to do a username and your email. Because they figured out that those are the absolute minimum steps people need to get started on the product. There's not 5, 6, or even more forms they have to fill out just to get going. They can get all that later. They just want to get people enrolled and working within the product quickly. And whenever we can, we want to just skip steps altogether. Maybe instead of having people create a new username, you can just use, like a lot of websites are doing, one of their existing accounts, whether it's Facebook or Google or Twitter. And then instead of having to come up with a new password to remember and a new username, you can just use one you already have and be signed up in 1 or 2 clicks. Now, generally, and I'd say about 99.5% of the time, we want things to be easy like that. But we don't want to completely forget about our friend Spock here, because there are times where we need System 2. So this is a picture from the streets of London. So anyone who's visited London has noticed these signs on the street. And because most tourists in London are not accustomed to the UK, where cars are driving on the other side of the road. So when we're crossing a street, our System 1 and our habits kick in and have us look left when we're across the street, when we could potentially walk into oncoming traffic and probably ruin our vacation. So the streets of London have these triggers to kickstart that System 2 and take you out of that habit and look right where the oncoming traffic is actually coming from. So what we want to do is use System 2 whenever we think System 1 is going to cause problems. So for example, here from the web, consider when you're scrolling through the setup process of a new product, and as the example you used before, you're probably just clicking next or continue through the standard web setup. But when you get to that legal agreement, it's actually beneficial to cue users to stop and take pause and read for a moment. It's helpful if they read and understand what they're signing up for, and it avoids legal hassles for the company if there are clear signs they've read and agreed to those terms. So most of these forms require users to scroll down to the bottom of the text and check a box with their agreement before they can hit submit and enroll in the product. So rather than quickly clicking through, the user has to at least scroll through the terms and specifically mark their agreement to them. Pulls them out of that unconscious clicking and into that temporary conscious deliberation. Similar to this. So similar to this, whenever there are errors in a product, so a lot of email, when you think your user might commit an error by thinking too quickly, we want to pause them and take them out of that. So for example, Gmail started this, and now a lot of email programs do this, where when you write the word attachment in a program, but as you're writing your email, you forget to actually do that. They'll have this pop-up that reminds you of that, so you don't send that and have to send additional email. And there's also Uber. Their kind of surge pricing has been controversial, and one way that they want to make sure that people are clear about the terms of that, so that they kind of pause people through that process. We know Uber is a very simple app; it's very easy to work through. But you want to pause people that and remind and show them that there's this extra surge price. There's this right screen where they say, "I accept higher fare," and there's even this additional step where they have to type in the fare multiplier so that they acknowledge they're accepting that there's additional pricing. So that wraps up for the first step here, speaking to the right system, and we'll move on to our next step, which is priming our visitors. So for this one, I want to take a look at this, and I want to ask how many people here think they can tell the difference between a red and a white wine. Now, unless you've never actually tasted wine before, you probably are pretty confident you can tell the difference, but you actually might be a little bit surprised by your expertise. In a study that researchers did, there were 54 wine experts who were asked to taste 2 glasses of wine. One was red and one was white. And using the typical language of wine tasters, the panel described the red as jammy and commented it's crushed red fruit, even though it was actually a white wine. What the experts didn't realize and failed to notice on their own was that both wines were from the same bottle. The only difference is that one had been colored with a red and flavorless dye. So even these trained wine experts couldn't tell the difference between a red and white wine when they were primed otherwise. So this is an example we call priming, where our decisions and our actions, opinions, and everything are pretty much influenced by these subtle and often seemingly meaningless factors in our environment. Now, I'll preempt some questions that if you've been following in the news and seen that there's kind of this replication crisis in psychology, where there's a lot of studies that haven't been holding up. There have been multiple studies in priming where some of the particular applications of this concept have come under fire. So I've avoided any of those examples in here and just sticking to the main topic that basically our thoughts, feelings, and actions are primed by everything around us. So what you want to think about this is, how are the visitors to your website being primed? If we know it's so easy that even wine tasters could have how they taste something be affected, then we know that probably everything that's happening on your website is also priming people to take certain actions and perceive certain things. So let's walk through some ways that we can use priming on your site. The first way is with the words that your copy uses. So similar to what I was talking about earlier, if you have boring, technical, and jargony copy, then it's probably not going to resonate very well with your users. But if it's vivid, emotional, and descriptive, it's likely capturing their attention, making them interested in your product. So you take a look at Pinterest landing page here, and it evokes a specific and vivid use case. Words like dream spark emotions and engage us to check out the product further. And another example here from Kickstarter. I mean, Kickstarter at its most basic form is raising money from strangers, but that's not a very compelling value proposition. Whereas bringing creative projects to life sounds exciting and makes us want to share our creativity with the world. And similar to, as I mentioned before, in avoiding kind of technical terms, getting people excited about not just the features of your product, but the benefits. You can do this with words. So when the iPod first came out, they could have just said storage for 1 gigabyte of MP3s. But, as we said, I don't really know exactly what 1 gigabyte of MP3s means or why I should be excited about that. But instead, they use their marketing to say 1,000 songs in your pocket. And that sounds exciting and almost magical, especially back when the iPod came out. This is kind of a new concept to us. Makes us excited about the possibilities of the product. Now, outside of words, we can also use images. So look at this example from Instagram. There's this kind of beautiful image of the sunset and someone capturing it. And it not only makes you just kind of gives like kind of warm emotions and feelings, this interesting travel, but also shows you what you can do with the product. So you can, when you're doing cool things and seeing amazing stuff in the world, you can capture that using Instagram. Another way to prime with images is to use people. We're very social. Humans are naturally very social. We tend to trust things that have kind of warm, relatable, smiling faces back at us. So like this example from CRM product Highrise, where that traditional sales page here on the left, and tested this with using just a simpler page with a nice smiling person. They saw a big increase in the number of conversions on the website. And the final way you can do this is priming with color. Every core color and even the shades of those colors makes a big difference in how we feel and perceive something. So I won't go through the specific details for the sake of time of these, and we'll share the slides after, but understand how color relates to people and how you want your product to be perceived in that way. So that covers priming, and it moves us to our third option here, which is framing the action. So to start with this, take a look at this picture here and look at the inner square. So which one looks darker to you? Is the left or the right? And which one seems to look lighter? Well, the trick here is that they're actually exactly the same, but they look a lot different when they have a different frame around it. When there's a darker frame, it looks a lot lighter. When it's a lighter frame, it looks darker. So let's get to something we call framing, which is the way our choices are arranged and presented to us changes the way we perceive our options and make decisions. So look at an example of this. This is a famous example of how much framing affects our decision making, especially in a business context. So in this example, The Economist had this traditional options for subscriptions to the magazine on the left, where there was a cheaper option where just the online subscription, and the more expensive option, which gave them online and print. And they tested this out with a separate one where they added a third option. So now there wasn't just the print and web, they actually added this middle one of just a print subscription, which was the exact same price as the print and web. Now it seems kind of pointless to have two options at the same price. Like, of course, you would just choose the print and web if you wanted that, right? Well, you would be right. That completely changed the decisions that people made. So when there was only the two options, the majority of people went with the cheaper one. But when you added in that third option, or what we kind of call a decoy effect, pretty much no one picked that, and a very small amount of people actually chose the cheaper one. All of a sudden, with that third option in there, the more expensive one, the print and web, looked like a great deal, or 84% of people chose it. So the way you frame options makes a big difference. Another way to do this is what we call the center stage effect, where we tend to choose the middle option. It's very comfortable us to choose the middle one. So you want to be intentional with that. When you're giving people options, whichever one is most popular or is probably the best for the majority of users, if you put that one in the middle, we're more likely to take it. Another way is what we call anchoring. So Steve Jobs, when the original iPad was released, he was showing off its high resolution screen and all of its impressive features. And he asked the audience how much they thought this revolutionary device should cost. He asked them, what should we price it at? He said, if you listen to the pundits, we're going to price it at under $1,000, which is code for $9.99. He had this big $9.99 up on the screen. And he left it there for several minutes as he kept talking through the product. And when it came time to actually announce the price, he said, I'm thrilled to announce to you the iPad pricing starts not at $9.99, but at just $4.99. And on screen, the $9.99 was crushed by this falling $4.99. All of a sudden, $4.99 seemed like a pretty good deal compared to the original $9.99 that he showed up. Because what he did was he set an anchor for us. The iPad was a brand new product, and we didn't really have much perception of what it should cost. So he set that perception and then made the actual price seem like a great deal against that. So another example of anchoring is on this website that some copywriters did an A/B test on, where they had their pricing plans listed out in the typical way, where we go just the cheapest is on the left, then we go more expensive to the right. They played around with anchoring, and they flipped that, and they put the most expensive option on the left, and they saw a 500% increase in the number of people that picked what they call the best value option here. Because we tend to read left to right. And when we saw this option on the left, all of a sudden that one looked like a great deal compared to that. Another way to do this is to frame value. So, for example, on this page, ask them for a donation. If it just said on the headline, please donate $3 today, I mean, I might consider donating, but that's not a very compelling message, and maybe I kind of want to keep my $3. But when you phrase it as saving a baby's life for less than the price of a cup of coffee, I mean, that's something that I feel like I'd probably be a pretty terrible person if I didn't actually do that. So you can frame value effectively and show it's not just a dollar amount. There's more things involved, and there's more value in that. Also want to frame what's popular. When people are looking at options in your product and they're new with it, they're most likely to go with what most other users are choosing. So let people know that. If there's a basic option that most of your users tend to use, just share that. And along those lines, use social proof, one of the classic persuasion techniques. Whether it's talking about how many other companies are using your product, or using some sort of celebrity endorsement to demonstrate why it's great, or it's been featured in all these big fancy publications. It generates trust. Like, we tend to trust the crowd and the wisdom of the crowd, so make sure to utilize that when you can. And finally, you can use urgency. We tend to procrastinate, delay taking action, so whenever that becomes a little more urgent, we're a lot more likely to do this, such as when we're looking at flights and I see only one seat left for a great deal, I'm going to pounce on that because I don't want to miss out on that. So that covers framing, and then moves in my last portion here, which is experiment. So while all these are great concepts and these give you the basics of the psychology, ultimately you have to run tests to see what really works in your website. So for example, this is another example of a test that Highrise ran, where they had this traditional sales page on the left, which basically uses most of the best practices that you see are recommended in web sales. And they wanted to kind of test if that really worked as a concept. And they made this one on the right, which is just a more boring, more plain, kind of longer copy website. And for whatever reason, they found that performed significantly better than the original one. This kind of goes to show that, best practices or theories that we present and studies that are shown from academic researchers, none of those are fully infallible, and that your web audience might be different than another website that found something else. So you always have to test and see what works. And ultimately, when we think about using psychology, the real behavioral method is experimentation. Everything we know about social science and behavioral economics comes from kind of rigorous scientific studies that have shown what people respond to and what they don't. So if you really want to have a psychologically driven website, then experimentation is how you really do that. And we're fortunate to live in an era where on your website, it's really easy. You can use basic A/B tests, which are essentially just the easiest, most powerful way to test and learn, and basically a simplified version of the randomized control trials that researchers use in the field. There's plenty of technology to do this, and such as our friends and add this, and it makes it really easy. All you have to do makes it very simple to just make some tweaks to your website. You can try out a couple of these concepts, different ways to frame, and then test them against each other and see what works. So that covers everything here. I'll do a quick run through of the core concepts here. Just remember to know the psychology of your site, understand which system of thinking your visitors are using, know what's priming them, and look at how the actions are being framed. And then take those and experiment to find out what works. Test different ways of using all these theories. Test different ways of framing. Test system 1 for system 2. Use the software that's out there to run A/B tests, and keep going until you find out what works. And reap the benefits. The more you test, the more you find works, the more effective your website's going to be, and the more successful your site will become. So that wraps it up for me. I'm open to doing some questions and comments, and I would love to hear from people. You can email me, follow me on Twitter, or add me on LinkedIn. And with that, I'll turn it over to do some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. That was really insightful. This is not the first time I've seen it, but I still learned something, which is awesome. This is the time to submit any questions that you have in your Zoom Q&A console at the top of your screen. And yes, we will be sending out video. We did get some feedback that on some people's screens, the slides were cutting off, so we will be PDFing this and sending it around with the video attachment. We don't have too much time, but there were a couple questions that came in, so we'll go straight into that. You talked a lot about A/B testing, but do you have specific guidance on what parts of the site that you would recommend people test?
Yeah, that's a good question. I always think you want to test closest to whatever the ultimate action is you want people to take. So go straight to the source of whatever the key action, whether it's signing up for a website or hitting a download button. I usually start there, as that's where you get your biggest results. And then maybe you find that you want to start working through the different layers. Like, I think about when we test emails, like, first you got to get people to actually open an email before you can test a click through. So start at the core of the action, and then from the main action you want to take, and then kind of work up from there and see if you can start driving more people to actually do that.
Okay. What is your overall advice for mobile responsive websites? Is there any difference?
For mobile responsive websites, as far as like how people perceive, I would guess the question is a little more about whether people react differently to mobile responsive sites. And I would say yes, just because, I know when I open up a website and it's not optimized for mobile, it's pretty hard to navigate, and I probably am going to skip off of it. So I think that gets back into kind of system 1 thinking, that you want things to be really easy to use and intuitive. And if something's not optimized for whatever the screen is you're on, then it's less likely you're going to spend the time on that and take the action.
Okay. Let's see. We have, how do you approach brand versus tactical messaging?
Brand versus tactical. So I think it just depends on what the goal, the given page is that you're on and what you want people to do. So, the kind of first step of all this is understanding what you want people to do on a given website. So if the site is more a general branding site and you want to kind of communicate that, then that's kind of the language you want to go with. But if you're on a sales page, for example, where you want someone to click through to a checkout page or something like that, then it should be a little more tactical geared towards that.
Okay. This is kind of a broad question, but how long do you traditionally give a test to run before you reach statistical significance?
Yeah, so we, for any given test, I don't like giving a specific time frame. What we do is, we have a lot of people that are kind of spirits of research, and we usually calculate whatever amount of traffic we need ahead of time. for a website or the number of people we need to see in email or whatever it is. So we use like R and some statistical programming to run those numbers ahead of time and know what we need to hit, and then however long it takes, we just wait until then.
Okay.
I've heard a lot of people say give it like generally 2 weeks. 2 to 4 weeks is a general rule of thumb, but it really depends on how much traffic you're seeing. And like I said, the more you can look at how to calculate that ahead of time. But I'd say at least 2 to 4 weeks. The longer, the better, because the longer you go and the more traffic you get, you're to understand what's noise and what's signal.
That makes sense. Okay, and last question that we have time for. What additional resources would you suggest to try and that you've used with success?
So resources. So I'd say from the psychology perspective, if this is brand new to you and you just kind of want to learn more about the actual concepts here, I think Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely is a really good starting point. If you want to look a little more into technology, I think Hooked by Nir Eyal is really good at looking at how products apply this. I think that from looking into more the testing experimentation side, I think Conversion XL is a really good resource. They have a blog and some courses and things like that. And if you kind of understand a little more of the deeper stuff of the kind of statistics behind research, there's a book called Naked Statistics that's kind of a surprisingly fun read, given it's all about stats, but that helps you kind of understand the basics of the testing aspect, or kind of the science behind the testing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. This has been a really, really insightful webinar, as I mentioned earlier. Just to repeat, we will be sending out the slides, the video of the webinar, and a summary of the webinar to everybody who registered. If you have any additional questions, Eric's information is right on the screen, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next Add This webinar. Thank you again, Eric.
Thank you.